There is a silent, almost imperceptible moment that precedes all manipulation. It is the moment when the other person's mind leans, without realizing it, towards a trap woven with words. The question seems light, innocent, even cordial, but behind its simplicity lies the thread of an invisible net, stretched with millimeter precision over the psychological field, and whoever doesn't understand the danger is already trapped before even answering. It was Carl Jung who said that the most dangerous symbols are those we believe we understand. The same applies to questions. The most treacherous are precisely those that sound familiar, human, unassuming. But it is in them that the deepest power games are hidden. Imagine an ordinary room, an everyday conversation, a banal exchange of glances. Suddenly someone asks, "Why are you so nervous?" The sound seems harmless, but the vibration is subtly accusatory. At that moment, something inside you awakens a need to justify yourself, to prove your innocence in the face of a guilt that doesn't exist. And the cruelest part is that by answering, you have already accepted the role of defendant. The question doesn't want to know how you feel. It only wants to reposition power. It's a seed sown in the field of the unconscious, destined to germinate into doubt. The manipulator doesn't need to convince you of anything. It's enough to make you doubt yourself. Carl Jung would understand this as a movement of shadows. The shadow is cunning. It doesn't need to act directly. It only needs to insinuate. True domination doesn't happen when someone forces you to believe in something, but when they make you begin to distrust your own perspective. That's when inner exile begins. The kind where we cease to inhabit the center of our perception and instead live on the margins of others' opinions. When someone makes you feel the need to explain what doesn't even need explaining, they've already begun to rewrite your reality. These questions, disguised as curiosity, have been used since the dawn of human interaction. They are distorted mirrors of the soul, subtle instruments of emotional control. Don't you trust me? For example, this is one of the most ingenious. It doesn't seek an answer, it seeks surrender. It forces the other person to choose between submission and guilt, between naivete and loneliness. The mind wavers, the heart hesitates. The question creates a false dilemma, a field where any answer is already defeat, and the manipulator knows this. He doesn't need to shout or impose. He just needs to smile and wait for you to become entangled in the labyrinth of doubt. Jung might say that this is the moment when the collective unconscious manifests itself with all its force. It's not just an interaction between two people. It's an archetypal echo of power and submission, of predator and prey, of mentor and disciple. It's the eternal conflict between the consciousness that seeks to remain whole and the shadow that tries to dissolve it. All psychological manipulation is, ultimately, a battle between light and unconsciousness, and every time we give in, we strengthen the shadow that silently observes us, waiting for a new moment of weakness to act again. But how to recognize the voice of the shadow? How to distinguish the question that seeks understanding from the one that desires control? That is where wisdom begins, not in knowing how to answer, but in knowing when to be silent. Conscious silence is an invisible sword. It cuts the web of manipulation with the same subtlety with which it was woven. Faced with provocation, the wise person does not retreat, but neither does he react. He observes. He remains at the center of his being, where doubt cannot reach. Carl Jung said that silence is the space where the soul breathes, and it is in this space that freedom is restored. The manipulative mind fears silence because its power dissipates within it. Without your reaction, it has nowhere to stand. All manipulation needs a stage, and the stage is your response. When you fall silent, the show ends. But this silence is not escape, it is power. It is the refusal to participate in the invisible game of emotional control. It is the recognition that there is nothing to prove. The wise person does not respond to provocation because they know that every word given to the manipulator becomes raw material for a new distortion. However, there is an even deeper trap, one that lies not in the words of others, but in our own. It is the temptation to want to explain ourselves, to want to convince the world that our intentions are pure, that our emotions are legitimate. It is the inner voice that says, "I need to defend myself." Jung called this projection, the act of placing outside ourselves the struggle we should face within. Every time we try to correct the image that others have of us, we lose a fragment of autonomy. True integrity lies not in being understood, but in remaining whole even when we are misinterpreted. So, what to do when faced with these questions disguised as interest? The answer lies in clarity. You need to see the game before it's played, to perceive the emotional movement before it drags you down. When someone tells you, "Why are you so nervous?" respond calmly, "I am fine," and refocus on what really matters. When someone provokes you with, "Don't you trust me?" answer with inner truth, "I trust in what is consistent, and nothing more." It's not about arrogance, but about self-control. It's not about defeating others, but about not losing yourself. Humanity has always sought ways to escape manipulation, but few realize that it begins within. The true manipulator is the part of us that accepts the role of victim, that feeds on the need to be understood, loved, or approved. As long as this part governs, any external word can trap us. Jung spoke of the need to integrate the shadow, not reject it, but acknowledge it. Only when we see the internal manipulator can we free ourselves from external manipulators. Because whoever masters their own shadow can no longer be mastered. Perhaps that's why the modern world, so full of voices, is so vulnerable. Everyone wants to be heard, but few want to listen to themselves. We chase after approval, explanations, validation, and in this constant movement, we open space for any voice, however empty, to guide us. Manipulation flourishes in the soil of insecurity, and insecurity is born from disconnection from one's own center. The first step to regaining power is not to confront the other, but to rediscover oneself in the silence of one's own being. Carl Jung taught that individuation, this process of becoming who we truly are, requires the courage to inhabit inner solitude, because only there can we hear the original voice, the one that doesn't need to justify itself. When you discover this voice, no question imprisons you, no provocation moves you. The manipulator may try, but will find in you only a calm mirror, where their intentions dissolve without resistance. This is the point where the soul becomes free, not through escape, but through clarity. And it is precisely at this point that the path begins to narrow. For when the mind is freed from external questions, it begins to listen to the internal ones. And it is these, those that come from the depths of the soul, that truly demand answers. Those that were not asked by another, but by the unconscious itself calling for transformation. In the silence after the game, the question arises that no one else can ask for you. Who is the real self behind all the voices that answer? This question is not a trap, it's a portal, and crossing it is the first step towards what's to come. There are questions that don't seek answers, only open wounds. "What are you hiding from me?" is one of those. It doesn't stem from a desire to understand, but from a need to dominate. Its intention isn't to reveal the truth, but to erode your right to keep it silent. The manipulator who utters it wears the disguise of curiosity, but their gaze is that of someone who wants to invade. They don't ask for access to your soul, they demand it. And when you yield, when you begin to explain, justify, or defend yourself, they've already entered. The door wasn't forced. You opened it yourself, believing you were simply being transparent. But imposed transparency isn't a virtue, it's surrender. This trap repeats itself in homes, in friendships, in relationships that feign love. It happens when someone says, "If you have nothing to hide, why don't you show me?" The phrase seems logical, even morally superior. But that's where the poison lies. Privacy is confused with guilt, and silence with deceit. Little by little, you begin to feel ashamed of preserving what is yours. Your mind becomes an occupied territory, and the most painful thing is that this invasion happens with the consent of your good intentions. Wanting to prove you are honest becomes your own prison. Carl Jung taught that what we deny in ourselves returns through the gaze of others. The manipulator, in trying to extract your truth, is actually projecting their own fear. They fear their own opacity and seek light outside because they cannot bear the shadow within. That is why those who accuse so much are often the ones who hide the most. In the unconscious, the soul perceives this mirror and tries to warn. A slight discomfort, a feeling that something is not right. But because the rational mind wants peace, it ignores the warning, and then the cycle closes. You give your secret to those who have no eyes to understand it. I remember a banal scene, the kind that could happen in any home. A woman opens her partner's cell phone while he sleeps, not because she has proof of anything, but because the doubt has become unbearable. He wakes up, confused, and asks, "Why are you doing this?" She replies, trembling, "I just want to know the truth." He tries to explain, tries to calm her down, tries to be transparent, and the more he talks, the more she feels that something is hidden. The content of the words doesn't matter because the game is already set. Suspicion needs fuel, and every explanation serves as bait. In the end, there is neither villain nor victim, only two consciences dominated by the shadow, one demanding invasion, the other yielding out of fear of losing. Jung would say that both are trapped in the same projection. One tries to invade the other because they have lost touch with their own center. The other allows themselves to be invaded because they believe that love is measured by exposure. But love, true love, is the sacred space where mystery is respected. To love someone is to accept that there are regions of the other that do not belong to us. Only those who know themselves well enough are capable of not demanding total transparency. Trust is not born from surveillance, but from shared silence. On the surface, manipulation seems like a simple matter of communication, but at its core, it touches the deepest roots of the soul. The one who asks, "What are you hiding?" activates an ancient archetype, that of the inquisitor who fears the darkness. And the one who answers fearfully awakens the archetype of the innocent who feels compelled to prove their purity. This psychic dance, repeated for millennia, keeps humanity trapped on the same axis of guilt and control. And while it repeats itself, true wisdom remains forgotten, the wisdom that there are secrets that sustain the balance of being. Now imagine a different scene. A man walks down a deserted street at night. He carries a notebook in his hands, and inside it are notes he has never shown to anyone. They are confessions, fears, dreams, and symbols that he himself is still trying to decipher. Suddenly, a voice approaches him. What's inside? He hesitates. He could show it, after all, there's no crime in writing. But he knows that if he opens that notebook, his soul will lose something that cannot be recovered. So he smiles and replies, "Just words." And he continues walking. In that simple gesture, he preserves not only his privacy but his very identity, because what is inside the notebook doesn't need to be understood, it needs to be lived. This man is an image of the self that Jung described, the invisible center of the psyche, guardian of inner meaning. Everything that manipulates you tries to snatch the notebook from your hands. Everything that liberates you teaches you to hold it serenely. The shadow will always try to read your pages. Consciousness must learn to say no, calmly, without anger, without fear. There is no offense in preserving the invisible. The secret is not the hiding place of evil. It is the cradle of mystery. And it is in it that the soul is strengthened. But there's a detail that few realize. The manipulator isn't always external. Sometimes it's an inner voice that asks, "What are you hiding from yourself?" And that's the most dangerous question of all, because it divides consciousness. One part observes, the other hides. One wants light, the other fears the brightness. And in the midst of this battle, the symptom emerges. Anxiety, guilt, insomnia, unexplained fatigue. These are the coded messages of the unconscious, trying to reveal what has been locked away too tightly. The same mind that cannot bear to be invaded also cannot bear to carry so many secrets. Jung said that the unconscious does not forgive inner lies. It demands answers, even silently, until the truth is acknowledged. But acknowledging is not the same as confessing. We don't need to tell everything to everyone. Just let the light touch what is already ripe to emerge. The rest must remain in the shadows, where the roots of the new being germinate. It is in this secret space that transformation happens, and every attempt at premature exposure is an abortion of the soul. Therefore, when someone pressures you with invasive questions, observe not only the other person but yourself as well. Question, why does this affect me so much? Sometimes the fear of being accused reveals an unintegrated fragment, a part of you that still seeks approval. The external manipulator only awakens the internal manipulator. Healing begins when we stop reacting and start understanding. And then another question arises, more subtle, more poisonous. Do you think you are better than others? It is the natural continuation of the previous one, the blow that strikes not at secrecy, but at dignity. This phrase comes when you begin to set boundaries, when your conscience begins to say, enough. It is the shadow's final attempt to drag you back into the realm of guilt, because deep down, nothing threatens the manipulator more than someone who refuses to justify their own peace. But what happens when that question is asked by someone you love? When it comes laden with tears? When it sounds like despair and not an accusation? The heart wavers. Limits and compassion become blurred. It is at this point that the psychological path becomes spiritual. Jung would say that this is where the soul is tested, when it needs to be firm without being harsh, when it needs to love without self-annihilation. It is the moment when we discover that freedom is not solitude, but integrity. And it is precisely in this moment of conflict that something transforms. The question no longer hurts in the same way. You listen to it, breathe, and recognize the echo of the shadow that uttered it. There is no longer a need to react. You understand that the other person is merely mirroring the fear of being forgotten, the terror of not being enough, and then, instead of responding, you simply remain present. This silent presence is what breaks the cycle. Because true wisdom lies not in defeating the manipulator, it lies in dissolving the need for the game. With each unspoken word, with each secret preserved without guilt, the soul recovers a part of its original power. Privacy ceases to be a defense and becomes a temple. And within that temple, a new consciousness begins to be born. But there is something more, something that the ordinary eye does not perceive. When the mind ceases its conflict with the other, the unconscious opens the next door, and on the other side, a new voice emerges, deeper, older. It doesn't ask what you hide, nor what you fear. It simply whispers, "Are you ready to see what has always been hidden within yourself?" This voice does not belong to the manipulator. It belongs to the awakening, and the journey is about to begin. There are questions that don't hurt through force, but through subtlety. Do you think you're better than others? Is one of them. It arises the moment you begin to walk alone, when your integrity becomes too uncomfortable for those who still live in the collective reflex. It's thrown with a half smile, as if feigning humility, but its purpose is ancient, to break your coherence. This question is born from fear, not yours, but the fear the other feels when seeing someone who refuses to follow the same path. When someone accuses you of thinking you're better, what they're really saying is, "Your freedom bothers me." Carl Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming oneself, is solitary because the world fears what is authentic. The awakened soul disturbs the sleeping crowd. When you decide to follow your own truth, you inevitably awaken the shadow of those who prefer to remain in inherited certainties. And it is then that voices disguised as morality emerge. Who do you think you are to walk away? Or, why can't you be like the others? These questions don't ask for answers. They demand submission. They want to lead you back to the comfort of the collective, where thinking for yourself is a sin and obedience is a virtue. But the free spirit doesn't fit into that mold. It pays the price of difference. And it is at that price that consciousness matures. The real mistake is not walking alone, but renouncing one's own center to please the gaze of others. How many times have you hidden a conviction for fear of seeming arrogant? How many times have you diminished yourself to fit into the affection of someone who couldn't bear your full light? What if the fear of seeming arrogant is simply a reflection of your difficulty in fully accepting yourself? Shame manipulation is perhaps the most silent of all. It doesn't force you. It only makes you doubt. Little by little, you begin to think that having principles means being rigid, that having clarity means being arrogant. And so, the manipulator wins without needing to raise their voice. They convince you to trade authenticity for acceptance. But purchased acceptance is a pact with emptiness. The more you try to adapt, the less you recognize yourself. The price of approval is always the mutilation of the self. Jung saw this as a movement of symbolic repression. When the soul relinquishes what it is to maintain bonds, it begins to project its unlived forces onto the other. The docile person, who fears asserting themselves, ends up attracting precisely those who abuse them. Psychological destiny is mathematical. What is not expressed manifests itself through a mirror. And every time you apologize for existing in an integral way, you reinforce the invisible domination that surrounds you. But there's something deeper. When someone asks you if you think you're better, the collective unconscious echoes an ancient myth, that of the fallen angel who dared to shine too brightly. Since time immemorial, we have been taught to fear our own light, as if all brilliance were presumption. However, Jung reminded us that denying one's own light is as destructive as denying one's own shadow. The soul that extinguishes itself so as not to offend the world also betrays itself. Who decided that humility means hiding? Who decreed that virtue resides in obscurity? In truth, true humility is born when you recognize your greatness without needing to show it off. It is not pride that leads the soul to ruin, but self-deception. The authentically humble person does not deny their own worth. They merely offer it in service. They know who they are, but they don't need to prove it. This serenity is intolerable to those who live in disguise. That is why the world tries to wrest from the upright the doubt about their own purity. There's an old story that beautifully illustrates this. A man was walking through a village where no one stood out. Everyone wore the same clothes, spoke the same way, thought the same way. One day he decided to sing. His voice was different, free, alive. The village gathered and confronted him. "Who do you think you are to sing louder than everyone else?" He replied, "I'm not better, I just don't want to be silent." And he continued singing, even alone. At first they mocked him, then they feared him, and finally they began to imitate him. Because what is authentic always awakens the desire to return. Jung said that the unconscious is a chorus, and that each soul is a unique note. When one of these notes falls silent for fear of being out of tune, the entire universe loses part of its harmony. But what to do when shame comes disguised as love? When someone close to you tells you, "You've changed, you're different, you're not the same anymore." The mind wavers, the heart defends itself. You start to justify yourself, trying to prove that you're still good, still approachable, still the same. And that's where you get lost. Because growing up is changing. Metamorphosis is always interpreted as betrayal by those who fear evolving. Could the problem be that it's not your change, but the other person's attachment to the old version of you? This is the point where the soul must choose between belonging and being true. Belonging to the group is comfortable, being true is lonely. But the solitude that springs from authenticity is fertile. From it springs self-knowledge. The solitude imposed by manipulation, on the other hand, is sterile. It is the desert of emotional exile. The first type of solitude heals, the second makes one ill. Knowing how to distinguish between them is one of the great spiritual lessons. Carl Jung compared this process to the journey of the mythological hero, who descends into the underworld not to escape life, but to recover something that has been forgotten. The authentic hero is not concerned with appearing good or bad, right or wrong. He seeks to be whole, and those who seek wholeness will inevitably be misunderstood by those who live in fragments. The curious thing is that the more you free yourself, the more others will try to prove you wrong. It's the last resort of the collective shadow, to transform your lucidity into arrogance, your autonomy into a threat. And if you give in, you lose everything you've gained. That's why the wise person calmly replies, "I don't consider myself better. I just follow the path that is right for me." It's a simple answer, but it contains all the power of self-mastery. But what if this calmness is interpreted as coldness? What if the silence is seen as contempt? This is the irony of the inner journey. The more centered you become, the more the world accuses you of being distant. It's inevitable. Serenity seems arrogant to those who only know noise. And in this eternal misunderstanding, the seeker must learn to remain true to their core, even when the world calls them strange. Integrity is a form of love that others will only understand when they too awaken. There comes a moment when manipulation can no longer reach you. When it tries, it finds only the serene reflection of your gaze. That moment is the seed of freedom, but it demands courage. Courage not to apologize for being lucid, courage to remain kind without bowing down. It is at this point that the process becomes sacred, for it is no longer merely psychological, it is spiritual. And then, when the mind believes it has learned all the traps, the most subtle, the most treacherous of all emerges. "You won't be offended if I tell you the truth, will you?" It's a question wrapped in sweetness, almost in care, but it carries the most refined poison. It comes with the promise of honesty, but it's only a preparation for the blow. Because soon after will come the hurtful phrase, and if you react, they will say, "But you promised you wouldn't be offended." How can one react to something that hurts when the reaction itself has already been delegitimized beforehand? This is the perfect manipulation, transforming your sensitivity into weakness and your defense into guilt. And it is in this minefield that the soul will be tested. The part of the journey that begins here is no longer about the other person, but about your ability to remain awake in the face of cruelty, disguised as frankness. At the limit of this confrontation, Humanity discovers that truth, when used without love, is merely another form of lie, and it is there, precisely in this abyss, that the next revelation begins to take shape. There are words that arrive as if asking permission, but enter as if invading. "You won't be offended if I tell the truth, right?" That's the sentence that announces the blow with a smile. It carries a promise and a threat in the same breath. The promise is of sincerity, the threat of disarming your reaction. The manipulator knows that once you agree to the preamble, you can no longer react without seeming weak or unfair. He prepares the ground to hurt you with impunity. And when the offense comes, it seems legitimate, because you yourself signed the verbal contract of your surrender. Carl Jung said that language is a spell. Every word carries a spirit that acts even before reason understands, and the spirit that inhabits this phrase is that of anticipated guilt. The person does not seek to share the truth. They seek to protect themselves from the responsibility of saying it. It is the rhetoric of dissimulation, the art of hurting without acknowledging the hurt. In its most sophisticated form, it presents itself as care. "I don't want to hurt you, but," and the "but" is always the harbinger of the dagger. This manipulation is ancient and almost universal. In romantic relationships, it appears when someone wants to undermine the other's self-esteem without seeming cruel. "Can I tell you something without upsetting you?" And then comes the comment that plants insecurity. In the workplace, it appears disguised as constructive feedback, but with the intention of belittling. "Look, it's just criticism for your own good." In social circles, it takes on the tone of white-hearted gossip. "I don't want to speak ill of you, but you need to know." It's the same psychological pattern, the mask of virtue covering the face of attack. Have you ever wondered why this form of manipulation is so effective? Because it hijacks the value of the word truth. In a culture that idolizes frankness, whoever claims to be just honest gains a license to hurt. Society has forgotten that truth without compassion is destruction. Jung saw in this the shadow of the archetype of the sage. Knowledge used as a weapon, the same symbol that liberates, when distorted, becomes an instrument of humiliation. The man who uses truth to feel superior is not wise. He is merely someone who fears to look at his own deception. A woman once recounted how her mother always said before criticizing her, "Can I be honest with you?" And she, wanting to appear mature, always answered yes. The honesty would come, sharp as glass. "You'll never be as beautiful as your sister. Your father only has patience with you out of pity. You're hopeless at everything." The daughter grew up believing that this was love disguised as harshness, until one day she realized that the warning, "Can I be honest?" was just an alibi. The mother didn't want connection, she wanted power, and the most effective power is that which is exercised under the guise of honesty. Jung would explain this dynamic as the fusion of two complexes, the savior complex and the judge complex. The person believes they are opening the eyes of the other, when in reality they are projecting their own unconscious contempt. Telling the truth becomes a ritual of self-affirmation, and the listener, believing in the purity of the intention, accepts the pain as necessary. Thus, the manipulator and the victim dance together the drama of guilt and redemption. But what if the truth spoken with venom is also a form of shadow trying to emerge? What if, instead of reacting, the wisest response is to see what lies behind the wound? This is the spiritual paradox. The attack, when understood, can become a mirror. The offensive word reveals the psychic state of the one who utters it, not the one who hears it. When someone hurts you in the name of truth, they are revealing their own limits of love. And paradoxically, they offer you the chance to see how much you still need their approval to remain at peace. Manipulation only has power when it finds resonance within. There is a curious account of a monk who was insulted in a public square by an angry man. The monk remained silent, merely observing. When the aggressor finished, he calmly asked, "If someone offers you a gift and you don't accept it, whose gift is it?" The man replied, "The one who offered it." Then the monk smiled, "Then I don't accept yours." This story, which Jung would certainly appreciate, translates the principle of psychic autonomy. The insult only becomes real if we accept it as truth. But not everyone achieves this serenity. Most of us still get hurt, still react, and it is in this reaction that the shadow grows. When someone says, "Don't be offended," but the mind already begins to prepare its defense. The body tenses, the heart races. It's the unconscious activating the protective instinct. But by reacting impulsively, We give the other person the power they sought from the beginning, to control our emotional state. And manipulation, once again, fulfills its role. Why is it so difficult not to react? Because the ego hates to appear vulnerable. It wants immediate justice. It wants to correct, clarify, win. But conscious silence is not defeat. It is mastery. It is the ability to see the game and not participate in it. Carl Jung stated that higher consciousness does not defend itself. It illuminates. Offense loses its power when exposed to the light of understanding. There is some interesting data about this type of behavior. Modern psychological studies indicate that more than 80% of aggressive communication in personal relationships is preceded by attempts at softening the blow, the so-called protective phrases. The "with all due respect" before criticism, the "no offense intended" before a cruel joke, the "it's just my opinion" before judgment. These expressions are unconscious mechanisms for denying responsibility. The person wants to hurt, but without recognizing themselves as the aggressor. The unconscious, which always seeks coherence, creates a verbal illusion of innocence to justify the emotional outburst. Interestingly, the same research shows that those who use these preambles most often are the least tolerant of reciprocity. In other words, those who say, "Can I tell you the truth?" rarely tolerate hearing their own. This psychological hypocrisy is one of the symptoms of modern society, where everyone wants to be sincere, but few want to be mirrors. What if true freedom lies not in responding, but in looking at the hidden intention and simply returning it to its origin? An awakened soul knows how to discern. It senses when a word is born of love or vanity. It listens to the tone, not just the content. And when it perceives that the other uses truth as a knife, it withdraws, not out of fear but out of wisdom. The best response to poison is not to become poison oneself. Jung said that every human relationship is a field of symbolic energy, where each word is a creative or destructive act. Therefore, the silence of the wise is not empty. It is alchemical. It transforms the lead of offense into the gold of consciousness. With each blow that meets no resistance, something is purified. The ego cries out for justice, but the soul murmurs for peace. However, there's a detail that changes everything. The manipulator can be an internal reflection, not an external person. How many times do you ask yourself before acting, "What if I'm wrong?" or "What if I seem arrogant?" This self-censorship is the same mechanism as the manipulative question. The mind creates the preamble before hurting itself. Can I be honest with myself without offending myself? And then comes the cruel self-criticism, the self-judgment disguised as lucidity. The enemy hides in the mirror. Carl Jung warned that the greatest danger is when the archetype of the inner critic dominates the psyche. It pretends to be conscience, but it is punishment. It pretends to be reason, but it is fear. And so the individual becomes a prisoner of their own inner voice, which repeats the same phrases they once heard from the outside. Liberation only happens when we recognize this voice as not being the self, but a fragment of the shadow trying to maintain control. What if true awakening is learning to listen to others and to oneself without the prior contract of offense? And if a mature soul is one that can receive the truth without needing a warning, why does it no longer get hurt? But also, why doesn't it get hurt? Some say that language is the boundary between the human and the divine. Jung would see it as the symbolic portal between the conscious and the unconscious. Therefore, every word spoken with pure intention is a healing rite. Every word contaminated by manipulation is a regression to unconsciousness. Knowing how to distinguish one from the other is the beginning of true wisdom. And it is precisely when humankind begins to understand the hidden power of language that the next veil is lifted. Because behind the words and the questions, there is something even deeper, the silence that precedes them. And it is in this silence that dwells the mystery that no manipulator can touch. It is there that the journey now leads, where the word dissolves and consciousness learns to hear what cannot be said. There is an almost invisible moment when the game changes. It's when you, tired of verbal traps, masks of sincerity, and questions that don't seek truth, begin to perceive the hidden rhythm behind it all. At that moment, something within you awakens. Your gaze stops chasing words and begins to see the space between them. Manipulation only exists while consciousness sleeps, and when it awakens, the trick unravels. It is on this threshold that the soul learns to walk the narrow thread that separates lucidity from reaction. Carl Jung called this the soul's journey through its own abyss. The manipulator feeds on your doubt, your fear of appearing cold, your desire to be fair. But there comes a point when you no longer need to prove you're good. Kindness without discernment is merely naivete, and naivete is the door through which the shadow enters smiling. When someone tries to ensnare you under the guise of honesty, "I don't mean to offend you, but," and you calmly reply, "If you fear I'll be offended," perhaps what you're about to say doesn't need to be said. Something shifts in the air. Power returns to the center, and the spell is broken. The manipulator, now exposed, feels the weight of their own intention reflected back. The mask falls not with screams, but with the serenity of someone who is no longer afraid. But this balance is not easy. It requires constant, almost spiritual vigilance, because the most subtle enemy is internal. It's the impulse to always want to respond, explain, convince. It's the echo of the old ego that still seeks acceptance. How many times have you responded to something just to avoid the discomfort of silence? How many times have you tried to soften your truth to maintain harmony? The world teaches that it is noble to yield, but there are times when yielding is betraying oneself. Silence, when born of integrity, is more powerful than any speech. What if silence is not an escape, but a presence? There is a kind of calm that is not passivity, but contained power. It is the gaze that sees the hidden intention behind the word. It is the pause that returns the weight of the verb to the one who uttered it. Jung said that the true sage does not fight against darkness. He observes it until it reveals itself. In this state, each offensive phrase becomes a mirror. The awakened soul perceives the insult as a symptom of the other's pain. The manipulator, in trying to hurt, reveals himself naked in his own neediness. And then anger loses its meaning, because understanding has dissolved the poison. But the path to that point is narrow, as the Rabbi Jung often quoted said, "The whole world is a narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to be afraid." This phrase resonates deeply in the psyche. Fear is the guardian of the crossing. It tries to prevent us from moving forward, but it is also the sign that we are close to the truth. Those who fear manipulation still give it some power. Those who overcome fear no longer need to fear. It is not blind courage, it is lucidity. It is realizing that the other can only hurt you to the extent that you allow them to define your worth. Once, a disciple asked a master, "How can I protect myself from cruel words?" The master replied, "Learn to see them as wind. The wind only hurts what is not rooted." This image is accurate. The rootless ego is shaken by any breath of disapproval. The rooted consciousness remains firm. And how does one create roots? By knowing one's own center. Jung called this center the self, the totality that observes without identifying with the drama. When you find it, the world may scream, but inside there is only silence. But there's an unexpected twist. What if the manipulator who haunts you the most is the one living inside you? What if it's your own inner voice, the one that says, "You should have answered better. You were weak. You should explain yourself"? This is the final trap, the invisible dialogue between the ego and the shadow. The mind creates an internal tribunal and judges itself with the same questions that once hurt it. Why are you so nervous? You think you're better? Are you hiding something? Now these are no longer external voices, but inner echoes. The cycle has closed, and it is here that awakening becomes inevitable. The unconscious, when not listened to, repeats its lessons. It places you before the same people, the same situations, until you learn to remain conscious. When you finally understand the pattern, something breaks. You realize you are no longer the accused, you are the observer. And at that moment, the power that once belonged to the other returns within. Silence ceases to be a defense and becomes living awareness. But is it possible to live like that, in constant lucidity, in a world of noise? The answer lies not in withdrawing from the world, but in learning to be in it without dissolving. Jung said that true spiritual work is keeping the fire burning in the midst of the storm. The fire is your center, your clarity, your inner voice. There's no way to stop the wind from blowing, but it's possible to protect the flame with the hands of attention. Manipulation, when understood, ceases to be a threat and becomes training. Every attempt to throw you off balance is an opportunity to strengthen your presence. There's a curious story about a psychoanalyst who, after years of study, realized that his patients' greatest progress occurred not when they talked a lot, but when they could endure the silence between questions. That small space where the mind wanted to answer but the heart only breathed was where the truth was born. Perhaps that's the secret, not answering immediately, allowing consciousness to mature before speaking. The pause is the field where the unconscious reveals what the ego tries to hide. What if true power lies not in responding, but in remaining whole while the other tries to divide you? Manipulation only thrives in the realm of haste. The hurried mind wants to resolve, to end the discomfort. But the patient soul understands that there is wisdom in waiting. The manipulator wants reaction. The wise person offers presence. When you learn to sustain your own silence, the world begins to reveal its intentions. Those who sought to dominate you move away, for they no longer find an opening. Those who respect you draw closer, recognizing your integrity. Reality responds to the inner state. It always has. But there's a detail that almost no one notices. The one who tries to manipulate you is also, on some level, your mirror. He shows you where fear still exists, where you still need to stand firm. Without realizing it, he becomes part of your learning. That's why hating him is useless. It's like fighting with your own reflection. Gratitude, however paradoxical it may seem, is what dissolves the final shadow. When you can even be grateful for the manipulations because they taught you to see, it's a sign that the cycle has ended. Carl Jung believed that all consciousness is born from the conflict between opposites: light and shadow, truth and falsehood, word and silence. It's not necessary to destroy the manipulator, simply integrate it. It represents your old way of living, the one that needed control and justification. Now the new being needs no defenses, because it already inhabits clarity. And clarity is inviolable. And if the whole world really is a narrow bridge, as the old master said, perhaps the secret is not to run to the other side, but to learn to walk lightly over the void. Fear will be there, the wind too, but each conscious step transforms the abyss into a path. What was once manipulation becomes a mirror. What was once a trap becomes a lesson. The awakened soul realizes that there are no enemies, only sleeping parts asking to be seen. Silence is no longer the absence of sound, it is total presence. It doesn't shy away from questions, it merely observes them until they dissolve. Because wisdom, in the end, is not about knowing the answers to everything, but about recognizing which questions don't deserve answers. It is at this point, when the mind quiets and the heart understands, that the journey is complete. But the horizon still pulsates, and something beyond the silence begins to call. The journey is not over. It has merely changed direction. Something new is approaching, emerging from the depths of consciousness. Not a question, but a revelation. And what comes next will no longer just be heard, it will be lived. There comes a moment, after all the struggle, when the noise fades and only the essential remains. It is the point at which the soul, exhausted from defending itself, realizes there is nothing left to prove. The world may continue asking, testing, trying to capture your attention with its traps disguised as interest. But within you, something has changed. The space that was once occupied by doubt is now occupied by a silent, firm, and lucid presence. Carl Jung said that the individuation process does not end with intellectual understanding, but with the reconciliation between what we are and what we fear to be. And that is what remains after every journey, a reunion. The reunion is not with the other, but with yourself, with your original voice, the one that existed before the questions, before the opinions, before the need to explain who you are. This voice is serene, but unwavering. It doesn't react. It responds only when necessary, and it does so without hurting. It doesn't need to win. It only needs to remain. The wisdom that arises from this is not that of the scholar, but that of the human being who has learned to listen. To listen not to the noise of the world, but to one's own inner rhythm, the sound of consciousness breathing. And this is where everything becomes practical. Because it's not enough to understand the mechanism of manipulation. You need to act differently. The transformation begins with small, even invisible gestures. When someone throws you a question loaded with intention, "Why are you so nervous? Don't you trust me? What are you hiding? Do you think you're better off? Can I be honest without offending you?" They breathe. Don't give in to the urge to answer. Haste is the manipulator's territory. Pause is the territory of awareness. If your mind pushes you to justify yourself, observe. Simple observation already interrupts the cycle. In practice, this means choosing active silence. A silence that is not escape but a stance. It says, without needing to say, I know what I'm doing, I know what I feel, I don't need your permission to exist. This kind of silence has weight. It reorganizes the energy of the dialogue, dismantles the invisible game, and returns each word to its sender. There is no struggle, no anger, only clarity. And clarity is the end of all manipulation. But the journey doesn't end in silence. Silence is merely the passage to something greater, reconnection with one's own center. Jung described the self as the point where individual consciousness unites with universal meaning. It is at this point that life ceases to be a sequence of defenses and becomes expression. When you live from this center, no question imprisons you, because you no longer need to respond from fear. Everything that comes from the outside is filtered by the peace that comes from within. What if living from that center were, in fact, the true purpose of all human experience? Think about it. Perhaps all the traps, offenses, and provocations you've faced so far have been just disguised invitations for you to return to your center. Each manipulation was a lesson. Each difficult person was a mirror. Each cruel word was a chance to know yourself better. The outside world doesn't exist to punish you, but to reveal you. When consciousness understands this, even pain becomes an instructor. There is something profoundly liberating in realizing that no one has power over you without your consent. This isn't theory, it's daily practice. It's the moment when someone provokes you and you choose not to react. It's the instant when the other person tries to blame you and you decide not to carry the guilt. It's the day you realize you can love without negating yourself, speak without hurting, and be silent without hiding. That is true emotional independence. Not the coldness of someone who isolates themselves, but the serenity of someone who belongs to themselves. But is it possible to live like this in a world so noisy, so full of urgency and conflict? Yes, it's possible, as long as your attention becomes your temple. Carl Jung said that where your attention is, there your soul is. So take care of it. Choose wisely where to place it. Don't answer everything. Don't defend yourself against everyone. Not every criticism deserves a response, nor does every invitation deserve your presence. Learn to distinguish what comes from the shadow and what comes from the truth. This distinction is the foundation of your freedom. Sometimes, applying this to everyday life will require courage. Courage to calmly say no. Courage to remain silent in the face of provocation. Courage to admit that not everyone will understand you, and that's okay. Because true growth doesn't seek approval, it seeks consistency. Consistency is the purest form of peace. It doesn't need witnesses, it simply needs to be lived. Some say life is a battlefield, but perhaps it's a mirror. And in that mirror, the enemy we fear so much is merely a reflection of the parts of ourselves that haven't yet united. When you accept yourself completely, with light and shadow, mistakes and successes, speech and silence, the mirror dissolves, and then the other ceases to be a threat, becoming a companion on the journey. Even the manipulator begins to be seen with compassion, because you recognize in them the confusion that was once yours as well. What if this is the true meaning of love that mature consciousness learns? A love that doesn't need to possess, correct, or convince. A love that simply understands. It is in this state that silence transforms into teaching. It is no longer defense but language. It communicates balance, respect, and wisdom. It shows the world that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of meaning. And when you practice it, it begins to expand. The people around you notice even without rationally understanding. The atmosphere changes, the energy changes, destiny changes. Lucid silence is contagious. Ultimately, wisdom lies not in never being manipulated, but in recognizing when it happens and choosing differently. Awareness doesn't prevent others from acting. It prevents you from reacting unconsciously. Every time you perceive a trap and don't fall into it, a fragment of your soul returns home. That's how power is restored, not through force, but through attention. And when you realize you no longer need to react or explain yourself or prove anything, you will know you have crossed the narrow bridge the old master spoke of. Fear will still be there, but it no longer dominates you. Voices will still try to mislead you, but they no longer confuse you. Because now, within you, there is a center, and that center is unshakable. Carl Jung said that every process of enlightenment begins with accepting one's own shadow. And that is what this path teaches. Not to run away, not to deny, not to defend oneself, only to observe and transform. Wisdom, in the end, is simply this: a gaze that has learned to see without judging, a heart that has learned to feel without fear. If this journey touched you, if it somehow helped you see the power of silence and presence, I invite you to continue, to bring this awareness into your day, into every conversation, into every choice. Remember, every time someone tries to distract you from your center, the power lies not in responding, but in remaining. If this video brought you clarity, inspiration, or simply a moment of peace, please like it. Write in the comments what you felt, even anonymously, even if it's just one word. Share this content with those who need to remember their own power. And above all, subscribe to the channel, because together, in silence and lucidity, we can transform the way the world communicates, one awakening at a time.